the coming generations that not all of us are complicit in the mess that has been made of our country, for which we are all paying a hefty price. Brethren, we shall now go into the chapters of this book. And that's going to be the first chapter. Chapter 1. The truth, or should I say truth, dies in darkness. Nigeria is a very dark country, and we are in a particularly dark place as a nation. The Nigerian state is maintained by an inequitable system that is scaffolded by injustice, and the system is allergic to the supremacy of the law. The long years of military dictatorship have destroyed the appointive system of filing judicial positions refined in the early days of our independence, and the judges appointed by the soldiers and prompted by the inheritors have reached the heights of judicial offices. The Nigerian judiciary has since become completely immersed in the purulent practices of Nigeria and has become everything Nigerian. The truth teller invents nothing. It does nothing innovative either. It just tells the truth, pared down to the bones. When a land is as dark as Nigeria, and the very foundation of that land are found on lies, the truth teller becomes the outlier, one that is despised, persecuted, victimized, and sometimes outrightly eliminated or destroyed. The Nigerian state and its governing systems, including its force, the FRAP, is very adroit at all of the above and possess a superabundant arsenal of state mischief, which it very often deploys, sometimes without provocation, and many times without let. I am, however, happy to say, bring it on. Men, however powerful, are not God. I like that. The truth dies in darkness. A careful deconstruction of the short sentence would suggest that truth is akin to light. If the truth lives, darkness cannot coexist. And it is up to the truth to light up the darkness that is suggestive of evil. There are times in the history of men and nations when important than our own lives, I'll take that again. When the purpose, personal or corporate, becomes more important than our own lives. The truth of the putrefaction of our country, as typified by the stinking corruption of the judiciary, is urgent and by far more important than my personal convenience and or life. If I must self-immolate for you to behold the extent of the wrath, so be it. But I urge you, my dear audience, not to allow my sacrifice to be made in vain. I am introducing no evidence that isn't already in the public domain and in the full view of everybody that we care to check. However contemptuous they have become, or our collective intellect and commitment to the truth. Chapter 2, Beginnings. I have been known to blithely declare that I was born a lawyer, and whilst, this is interesting, so I'll take that again. I have been known to blithely declare that I was born a lawyer, and whilst being the insufferable brat that I could be, when amongst my family and friends, nobody has ever cared to dispute my unargued submission. I will seize this opportunity offered by this narrative to argue the conclusion I have never been asked to prove. Inolende, Oniyanrin, Omitowoju, Odeolo, Mokola. These are the streets of my youth, the dusty lanes and back roads that I walked as a child. My maternal grandfather's house is located at Inolende in Ibadan, and my first steps were taken in his home. And it was there that I found my voice and knew myself. Inolende shaped my life and my very world view. SF Olukole, Samuel Faleke Olukole, SF, to his friends and cronies, whispered in a mixture of awe and jest by his wives, children, and tenants. His most senior wife was my grandmother, the one that was truly my mother, Maami, Mama Agba, the most senior of his 4 wives. But in truth, the second, his first wife, having left him before he married my grandmother, who had also left her first husband. He was a strong man, but she was an even stronger woman. A fact that I have had reinforced to me by my own acknowledgement of the superiority of my wife's capacities as compared with mine. With Bahami's collection of wives came the inevitable management issues, which were particularly exacerbated by the fact that the last 2 wives, Bahami Elero and Yayemi, were both relatively young and considered themselves rivals. The call to Ashipa, conducted informally around Mahami's open wood stove, the Aharu, next to Yayemi, the favored wife, and her immediate neighbor upstairs. The delicate balance she maintained between remaining objective and truthful, without taking sides, and without offending her husband's favorite wife, is very last. I had mastered the art of being invincible in plain sight from my childhood. The Yoruba culture of my days revered age, and the young was to be seen but not heard. I learned to become invincible. Living with my grandmother, Mahami never required words to speak to me or with me. Her coughs had meanings. The way she inclined her head, her gaze, a frown, a wink, we were telepathic in our communications, and I knew better than to speak except when asked a question that required an answer. I was the essential Omo Oduagba. If Mahami was unbothered by my presence, others knew better than to query her judgments, and I earned the right to sit at gatherings where my peers were not allowed once their presence was noticed. I watched disputes settled within the family. I witnessed matrimonial curses involving uncles and aunts. I watched, I learned, and I became convinced that the pursuit of justice is foundational to the Yoruba culture and civilization. My family's compound at Inolende is a complex comprising of a sprawling single-story building, around which is wrapped a warren of rooms that form the perimeter walls. There is a frontage where we would gather at night, where cars were parked and the goats would have slept, chickens gone to roost, and where mats would be laid when the nights were hot or the moon was out. There we would gather to listen to tales told by the moonlight. Inolende was home to 8 to 10 other families, tenant of my grandfather, whole families, mothers, fathers, children, Igbo, Yoruba, Ijo, Isoko, a United Nations of sorts. Add 4 landladies into the mix, and the landlord's children and grandchildren. My grandfather ran a tight ship. He rarely got involved in the details. He trusted my grandmother as the senior and the oldest wife to adjudicate the everyday issues that arose from having so many people in the little space whenever the squabbling denizens failed to do so without intervention. The fact that she was scrupulously honest and unbiased in deciding these disputes brought to her enhanced her credibility and cloaked her with respect. I grew up watching and learning how the only way to perpetuate justice is to do unto others exactly as we would have them do unto us. I learned the value of self-respect as the very foundation of all respect, and how to tell the truth, unafraid of the consequences that men might deem themselves obliged to impose. Nobody dies from speaking the truth. I learned that at the root of Yoruba culture lies an abiding fidelity to the truth. I also learned that the first thing to reference is temperance, to ensure that you always stood in step with the truth. However old the adversary, however powerful it might be, whatever authority it might possess, if you had the truth on your side, the Yoruba traditional authorities, religious and spiritual, are obliged to stand behind you. To do otherwise is to betray the essence of who they are, to be debased, corrupted, and perverse. It is not for nothing that white is the symbol of Yoruba spirituality, with the undying lamp and the seeing eye at the peak of all. And then there was the picture, black and white. It's white, quite startling. A studio shot of a vibrant young man in repose, Baba's oldest child, my uncle, born to the first wife and half-brother to my mother. Everyone spoke of him with reverence. He was dressed in the full regalia of the barrister at law, pin-stripped pants, bewigged and all. He was the one who had read all the books. His portrait had the place of pride, and Baba's pride was easy and infectious. Daddy Potter was the model to which all must aspire if they were to be deemed of consequence in the Olukole clan. You might want to blame my childhood resolve to study law on him, but I would argue that he isn't to blame. The earliest thoughts of what I would do with my life were from my days at Abadino Primary School in UI. I fell in love with books and the serenity of the university campus, and I wanted to be a professor of theater arts, write and just read. I had pictures of myself forever surrounded by the ethereal beauties of Queen Elizabeth's Hall that I often gawked at. These were not the Mahamis of Inolende at all. I was admitted into Fiditi Grammar School in 1978, and whilst there, my innate flair for language and current affairs were starting to bud and ripen. I had begun to toy with the idea of reading political science and becoming a journalist. Somewhere in my head, however, I was decided that I would then pursue a degree in law. I believe that wanting to read law at the then University of Ife had something to do with the confusion experienced at the time. The University of Ife wouldn't admit anyone to read law without a first degree in those days. But before I was out of my teenage years and after I had wasted 3 years before being qualified for admission, and even after being admitted into the university, I had settled my mind on reading law. Please pay attention to my deliberate choice of the word. I read law. I studied law. I qualified as a lawyer. These things are required for me to be deemed a lawyer in law, but these were insufficient to make me a lawyer. I was born a lawyer. As I became more aware and conscious of myself, and long before my eventual admission to study law in LASU, I had settled on law as a calling. Law ticked each and every last one of the boxes of my youthful romantic views of life. I could read, write, act, even lecture as a lawyer, and I got to learn what laws to obey and which should be ignored. Sitting at Mommy's feet, I had heard her repeat ad nauseam. Ẹjọ́ là ń kọ́, ẹnìkan kì í kọjá. You must retain the temperance and calm to avoid losing your temper and avoid being blamed in the event of the inevitable disputations that attend daily coexistence. That will be the general interpretation, but it will be misleading to interpret in this light. Preceding the admonition would have been the reminder that served as a rebuke, that you should have talked instead of fought, and that any fight should be purely defensive to be justifiable. Yorubas are culturally disposed to polite, respectful, and reasoned disputations, and our very civilization is found on reasoning. I was born a lawyer. I read law in order to know the law, but I did not require either the Greek or anyone else to teach me the values of equity, equality before the law, powers and the responsibilities that come with wielding it, judicial and spiritual powers being at the apex of it all. I am fortunate to have read law in LASU at the time I did. I was blessed to have been taught by a lot of resourceful women and men, scholars who took pride in their own scholarship and hard work, men who had to think on their feet and make do with little or nothing, pioneering spirits, men for whom teachings was as much about learning as it was about teaching. There was Dr. Susu to teach the law of thought, the fatherly dean, Professor Yerokun. There was my tormentor, Professor Mike Ikariale, my brother and friend, the erudite Professor Festus Emiri San, and many more caring, loving, and dedicated teachers, including the immediate past Vice Chancellor, Professor Lanre Fagbon San. There were, of course, the outliers, Professor Yemi Oshibajo San, for one, and then there was I.O. Smith, aka 1.0 Smith, a testament to the commonality of the lowest pass grade as the norm in his course. I was blessed to have been taught by a motley crew of geniuses. I am, before anything else, a Nigerian. I am not a shrinking violet and nobody's saint. I have done whatever I have needed to do in order to advance my clients' interests in the past, but I have always been careful to play within the rules. I have always had a lot of admiration for professionals of all hues who have the dexterity to practice their trade profitably within the constraints of the Nigerian space. The same government that wouldn't be seen investing in social housing or public infrastructure would presume to regulate the contractual relationship that exists between a landlord and his tenants. I look at the laws and my knowledge of the reality of how long it takes to evict the debtor-tenant guides the decision. I have a novel clause inserted in every tenancy agreement I have drafted in my practice. It grants the landlord the right of re-entry in cases of default of rent and after issuance of a 7 days notice. This is legal, while it's been unlawful, but it has worked like magic over the years. Professor Smith had taught me ad nauseam that possession is ownership, and that in every claim related to real estate, my priority must always be narrowed in scope. I must always be to take possession. Everything else must flow from that. The only time we invoke the clause to evict a tenant from a client's property in Ikoyi, I happily received the writ for damages and promptly counterclaimed for the outstanding rent and the mercenary profits. This is like legal term. Now, who no fee pay rent, go pay lawyer with a question mark. We're happy enough to meet him in court and have him out of the property. He abandoned his claim. I am not a saint. I am a Nigerian, and I will gladly shake body for the policeman demanding my expired license, to the government officials to do the work for which I am taxed, and to the one installed at one of the several unlisted toll gates. I am a Nigerian, and I know what to do to get what I need. I also happen to generally clued in enough to be able to successfully navigate our shark-invested waters. This was the illusory cocoon in which I existed. I have always been familiar with the fact of our perversion as a people, and I have few illusions about equity and justice reigning in Nigeria. But I had always assumed that there were lines that should never be crossed. I was, however, slapped awake by the brazenness of the judicial brigandage unleashed on hapless citizens, corporates, and individuals by the Nigerian Supreme Court, acting under the direction of Are Afe Babalola. At least 5 justices of the Apex Court have been identified as guilty of odious corruption and or gross incompetence. Either is sufficient to have them removed from their office. And this is my petition to the Nigerian people, and most definitely to the NJC, Nigerian Judicial Commission. That's the NJC, right? A true lawyer never loses a case, for he is, if the truth be discerned, a minister in the temple of justice. And that is the cause that he or she must serve. As long as he has done his best professional duty, he is absolved of the obligation to take any side. He, in fact, has a duty to the court that is not discharged by any protestation of professional duty to the client. The lawyer is a servant of the court, a waiter in the temple of justice, an attendant to the blind priests and the priestesses that serves the blind goddess of justice. At least, justice either wins or loses. The lawyer is at all times a servant of the courts. Chapter 3. I want to take a tea break. Just a tea break. Catch my breath. And then we'll go on to the chapter 3 before we stop it. A quick one.
I am conscious of exactly what kind of country I live in. But it used to be my belief that as crazy as we might be, that there is still something that must undergird our system. And that is the sanctity of law. I used to believe that even if the High Court judges maybe a few might be corrupt, and I knew a few who were. Maybe 1 or 2 Court of Appeal justices might be amenable to pressure, but I never believed that an entire system would be subverted in pursuance of narrow interest until 2013. But I'll let the book speak for itself. But it is of critical importance that this book be written, and I will explain why. I worry about the society that we have built, that we are building, and that we are likely to bequeath to the next generation. I have tried my best to be faithful to the truth. I have allowed the truth to be the sole bridle for my pen, and I have written believing in the complete truthfulness of each and every word that I have put in that book. But the truth needs to be told. So what I have done for my children. I have done for my conscience. I have done my own bit. Let them do their own bit. Hopefully they find the grace to adhere to the rule of law. Thank you very much.
DF. Now let's go to chapter 3. I will read chapter 3, possibly to the end, and then maybe read chapter 4 as well. And let me see chapter 5. No, maybe up to chapter 4. Then we would wrap it up. So I'm going to take a course where everyone will be entitled to react. Then we will continue the reading after that. Maybe tomorrow afternoon. If you are able to join us, that would be great. If you have this copy, if you have a copy of this book, I implore you to read with us. I think it's mostly fun when you open it yourself and you are following the reading. Also, if you don't have a copy, I also implore you to please get a copy. You'll be doing two things. Number one, you'll get to know more of the deeply corrupted Nigerian judiciary. And what does that even mean? When everybody just says they are all corrupt, you need to understand the corruption level. Okay? Then secondly, you will be contributing into helping the children with disability, special needs, like autism and what have you in Nigeria. Because the proceeds of this book goes straight into funding at least 4 different charitable groups in Nigeria, taking care of children with special needs in Nigeria. So you will be doing 2 things at a time. You'll be getting 2 things in that regard, okay? So let's go to chapter 3. Having told us about his background, what motivated him to go and read law or study law and become a lawyer and all that, his childhood, and those who impacted in his world views and all that. Now, I think this is us now getting into the heart of the matter, right? So let's go to chapter 3. The practice of law. Prince Ademola Adeniji Dele, otherwise known as the Prince of Hope or Papa, was my friend and an older brother. I was president of the Lasso Student Union